What if I told you that the most shocking secret of Victorian marriage wasn't hidden behind closed doors, but was displayed openly for all to see? Picture this. You're touring a grand Victorian mansion in 1885. The butler leads you up the mahogany staircase, past oil paintings of stern ancestors, into the master bedroom suite. You expect to find a massive four-poster bed, draped in velvet, where husband and wife share their most intimate moments. Instead, you discover two separate beds, sometimes in different rooms entirely, each made with military precision by unseen hands. This wasn't poverty. This wasn't punishment. This was the height of Victorian sophistication, a deliberate choice made by couples who could afford anything they desired. The very people who filled their homes with children, who preached about family values and marital devotion, were the same ones who found the idea of sharing a bed not just unseemly, but medically dangerous. The twin-bed arrangement that we associate with 1950s sitcoms actually originated in an era when doctors warned that sleeping next to your spouse could slowly poison you both. The Victorian separate bedroom tells a story that shatters everything we think we know about love, marriage, and intimacy in the 19th century. This isn't a tale of sexual repression. It's a story of medical paranoia, social performance, and the invisible army of servants who made it all possible. To understand why loving couples chose separation over closeness, we must step into their world of coal smoke and carbolic acid, where the air itself was considered a weapon and distance became the ultimate luxury. Chapter 1. The Medical Conspiracy. The year is 1870, and you're standing in the bedroom of a wealthy London merchant. The first sensation that strikes you isn't visual. It's the weight of the air itself. Heavy velvet curtains, lined with lead weights, seal out every breath of outside air. The windows are painted shut or nailed closed, following the latest medical advice about protecting the home from miasma, the poisonous vapors believed to carry disease from the filthy streets below. The only warmth comes from a coal fireplace that occasionally belches smoke back into the room when the wind shifts. In this sealed chamber, two iron bedsteads stand like sentinels, each precisely 3 feet apart. The metal frames gleam with fresh carbolic acid, scrubbed daily by servants following strict sanitation protocols. These aren't beds, they're medical instruments, designed according to the latest scientific theories about health and hygiene. Victorian medical wisdom had convinced an entire generation that sharing a bed was a form of slow suicide. The prevailing theory held that during sleep, the human body expelled toxic vapors through the skin and breath. In a shared bed, surrounded by heavy curtains to keep out drafts, two people would essentially trap themselves in a poisonous fog of each other's exhalations. Popular medical manuals warned that couples who slept together would experience a gradual loss of vitality, developing pale complexions, nervous exhaustion, and eventually wasting diseases. Dr. Andrew Combe, a respected physician of the era, wrote extensively about the dangers of rebreathing vitiated air. His theories weren't fringe science. They appeared in medical journals and were taught in universities across Britain. The human body, he argued, expelled carbonic acid and other toxins during sleep. In a shared sleeping space, each person would be forced to inhale their partner's expelled poisons throughout the night, leading to what he termed conjugal consumption, a slow poisoning disguised as marital intimacy. The fear extended beyond simple air quality. Victorian doctors became obsessed with the concept of vital energy, a finite resource that could be depleted through excess of any kind. Sexual activity was considered particularly draining, especially for men, who were believed to lose essential life force with each intimate encounter. The separate bedroom served as a form of medical birth control, making spontaneous intimacy impossible, and ensuring that marital relations occurred only through deliberate planning. Women faced their own set of medical warnings. During menstruation, they were thought to emit toxic vapors that could sicken a husband sleeping nearby. Pregnancy brought additional concerns about disturbing the developing child through a partner's restless sleep. The medical establishment had essentially pathologized every aspect of shared sleeping, creating a comprehensive system of fears that made separation seem not just advisable, but essential for survival. The irony was palpable. Victorian families were large, often 8 or 10 children, yet the medical advice suggested that couples should minimize physical contact. How did a society that kept husbands and wives in separate rooms manage to produce so many offspring? The answer reveals the carefully choreographed nature of Victorian intimacy. Marital relations became scheduled events, planned encounters that followed strict protocols before each partner retreated to their sanitized sanctuary. Furniture manufacturers, sensing opportunity in medical paranoia, began marketing twin beds as technological marvels. Iron and brass frames were promoted as superior to wood because metal could be scrubbed with disinfectant and wouldn't harbor the bedbugs and effluvia that porous materials supposedly absorbed. Catalogs featured elaborate matched sets with coordinated nightstands and screens that could be positioned between beds for additional separation. The medical conspiracy that drove Victorian couples apart wasn't based on ignorance, it was based on the cutting-edge science of its time. Before germ theory was fully understood, the miasma theory seemed logical. If diseases spread through bad air, then controlling air quality became a matter of life and death. The separate bedroom was Victorian society's attempt to engineer health through isolation, to create perfect environments where pure air could preserve pure bodies. But this medical revolution required an infrastructure to maintain it. The twin beds needed daily scrubbing. The separate rooms required individual heating and cleaning, and the entire system demanded constant vigilance. Who provided this labor? Who made the Victorian dream of hygienic separation possible? The answer lay in the invisible workforce that moved through these sealed chambers like ghosts, maintaining the illusion of medical perfection while witnessing the human cost of enforced isolation. Chapter 2. The Invisible World. Servants behind the curtain. At 4 a.m, while the master and mistress slept in their separate chambers, the house was already stirring. In the basement kitchen, a scullery maid scrubbed dishes with hands red from lye soap and freezing water. Her breath formed clouds in the unheated space as she prepared for the day's most intimate task, entering the private bedrooms of her employers to maintain the elaborate fiction of hygienic separation. The chambermaid who climbed the servants' staircase carried more than cleaning supplies. She carried the secrets of the household. In her rough hands lay the evidence of what really happened behind the closed doors of the Victorian marriage. The separate bedroom system that the wealthy had embraced as the height of medical sophistication was only possible because of the invisible army of working-class women who made it function. Consider the sensory experience of a maid entering the master's bedroom in 1885. The air was stale with tobacco smoke and the lingering scent of bay rum cologne. On the nightstand sat a medical pamphlet about the dangers of nocturnal emanations, carefully folded beside a silver pocket watch. The iron bed showed the impression of one body, the sheets twisted from restless sleep. She worked quickly, stripping linens that might contain evidence of solitary habits the Victorian gentleman would never acknowledge publicly. Crossing to the mistress's chamber required navigating a different world entirely. Here, the air smelled of lavender water and face powder. The dressing table overflowed with bottles of tonics and treatments, remedies for the female complaints that plagued Victorian women. The bed might show signs of tears on the pillow, or more often, the pristine order of someone who lay awake staring at floral wallpaper, counting the hours until dawn. The servants knew everything. because the separate bedroom system made privacy impossible. In a shared marital bed, intimacy remained hidden under blankets and darkness. But with twin beds or separate rooms, every encounter left evidence for the staff to discover. Did the master sleep in his own bed, or was it undisturbed while the mistress's room showed signs of two occupants? The physical proof of the marriage's emotional temperature was laid out for servants to read like a daily newspaper. This created an extraordinary power dynamic. The lady's maid who dressed her mistress each morning knew which nights brought visits and which brought solitude. She saw the bruises that might be hidden by silk during the day, observed the pallor of a woman worn down by repeated pregnancies, or the relief of one who had successfully avoided them. The valet who prepared his master's chamber knew whether the bed had been slept in, or whether his employer had spent the night elsewhere, pursuing the other arrangements that respectable society pretended not to notice. The maintenance of separate sleeping quarters required military precision. The sanitarian movement demanded that bedrooms be aired daily to expel the poisonous exhalations of sleep. Maids wrestled with heavy, soot-stained windows, opening them at precise times to admit what passed for fresh air in industrial London. They hauled coal to separate fireplaces, filled separate hot water bottles, and maintained the complex heating systems that made winter nights bearable in vast, uninsulated houses. The workload was crushing. Where once a chambermaid might service one marital bedroom, the twin-bed system effectively doubled her duties. 2 sets of linens to wash in scalding copper vats, 2 chamber pots to empty and scrub, 2 rooms to dust, sweep, and maintain. The performance of upper-class respectability was built on the invisible labor of working-class women who made the entire system function while living in conditions that would have horrified their employers. The irony was stark. Wealthy Victorians separated themselves from their spouses to avoid contamination, yet they allowed strangers into their most private spaces to handle their waste, their soiled clothing, their most intimate possessions. The servants who scrubbed the floors inhaled the very dust their employers feared. The footmen hauling coal coated their lungs with the soot that masters tried to avoid. The separate bedroom was only clean because others did the dirty work. But servants were more than laborers. They were unwilling witnesses to a social experiment gone wrong. They observed marriages cooling as physical distance created emotional distance. They saw the loneliness that settled over households where husband and wife became polite strangers, sharing meals and social obligations but sleeping alone in their hygienic isolation chambers. The butler, that quiet authority figure, became the keeper of household secrets. He knew which doors remained locked, which rooms went unvisited, which marriages existed only for public consumption. The cook noticed when separate breakfast trays were required, because the master and mistress could no longer bear to share morning conversation. The housekeepers observed the gradual accumulation of dust on connecting doors that were never opened. In their cramped attic quarters, servants shared beds by necessity, while their employers paid fortunes to sleep alone. The contrast wasn't lost on them. They whispered about the strangeness of a system that elevated isolation as an ideal, while they found comfort in shared warmth and human presence. The separate bedroom, they understood, was a luxury that only the wealthy could afford, and perhaps only the wealthy were foolish enough to want. As gas lamps flickered out in the grand bedrooms below, servants lying in their narrow cots could hear the sounds of the house settling, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of doors opening and closing. Sometimes these sounds told stories of connection, of rules bent in the darkness. More often, they spoke of silence, of 2 people lying awake in separate rooms, trapped by the very system that promised to protect them. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Separation. The Victorian home was a 3-dimensional map of social relationships, with every room, corridor, and door carefully positioned to maintain appropriate boundaries. Nowhere was this more evident than in the design of the master bedroom suite, where architects collaborated with social expectations to create spaces that physically enforced the separation of husband and wife. Walk through any surviving Victorian mansion today, and you'll notice the deliberate geography of the marital quarters. The master's chamber and the mistress's chamber exist as distinct territories, often connected by a dressing room but sometimes separated by entire hallways. This wasn't accidental. It was architectural social engineering, designed to facilitate the medical and moral imperatives of the age. The husband's bedroom was positioned as a command center, typically offering easy access to his study or library. The space announced masculine authority through every design choice: dark wood paneling that absorbed light, heavy furniture built for durability rather than beauty, and walls decorated with maps of empire, hunting scenes, or portraits of military ancestors. The air carried the scent of leather, tobacco, and the bay rum cologne that marked a gentleman's morning ritual. This was a room that connected its occupant to the world of business and public affairs, reinforcing his role as the household's link to external power. The wife's bedroom existed in a different universe entirely. Lighter colors, delicate fabrics, and floral patterns created an atmosphere of refined femininity. The space was crowded with the tools of Victorian womanhood: elaborate dressing tables laden with perfumes and cosmetics, sewing baskets filled with embroidery projects, and bookshelves stocked with moral literature and religious texts. The bed itself became a shrine to feminine purity, draped with embroidered linens and surrounded by the soft textures that defined respectable domesticity. Between these gendered territories lay the architectural buffer zone, a dressing room or bathroom that belonged to neither spouse exclusively. This neutral space served multiple functions, providing room for the elaborate dressing rituals that both men and women performed, while maintaining the symbolic separation between masculine and feminine spheres. A husband could visit his wife's chamber without actually residing there, preserving the fiction of separate domains while still acknowledging marital connection. The middle classes, aspiring to upper-class standards but constrained by smaller homes and tighter budgets, adapted these principles creatively. When separate bedrooms were financially impossible, they embraced twin beds within a single room, creating symbolic separation even in shared space. Furniture manufacturers responded with elaborate matched sets that turned the bedroom into a showcase of coordinated design. Catalogs featured pages of twin bed arrangements, each promising comfort, health, and respectability in affordable packages. The twin bed became a marker of middle-class aspiration, a way to signal understanding of proper values even without the grand architecture of the wealthy. Some sets included small tables or decorative screens that could be positioned between beds, adding layers of separation within intimate space. The bedroom furniture itself became a performance of social climbing, demonstrating that even modest households could embrace the principles of hygienic separation. Victorian architects understood that the physical layout of homes shaped social relationships. The distance between bedrooms could facilitate or discourage interaction. Wide corridors and heavy doors created psychological barriers that made spontaneous intimacy unlikely. The very act of visiting one's spouse required crossing thresholds, both literal and metaphorical, that transformed casual affection into formal encounters. But the architecture of separation also created opportunities for transgression. The labyrinthine layouts of grand houses, with their multiple staircases and hidden passages, made clandestine movements possible. A husband could slip from his room without his wife's knowledge. Secret assignations could occur in unused chambers. The same design that was supposed to protect virtue also created spaces where virtue could be compromised. The physical separation reinforced power dynamics within marriage in subtle but significant ways. The husband's bedroom was typically larger, better appointed, and more conveniently located. His space was designed for both work and leisure, while hers was designed primarily for rest and beauty maintenance. The architecture made visible the invisible hierarchies of Victorian marriage, who had access to which spaces, who could move freely through the house, and who was confined to specific areas. Heating systems reflected these hierarchies as well. In an era before central heating, the allocation of fireplaces and coal deliveries became statements about relative importance. The master's study and bedroom received priority heating, while other spaces remained cold. The separate bedroom system required maintaining multiple heating sources, a luxury that demonstrated wealth while creating additional work for servants who had to tend separate fires throughout the house. The Victorian obsession with propriety extended to guest accommodations as well. Unmarried visitors of opposite sexes were housed on different floors or at opposite ends of hallways. The entire house became a carefully calibrated system for maintaining appropriate social distances, with the separate marital bedrooms serving as the model for all other relationships within the domestic sphere. Modern visitors to Victorian homes often comment on the maze-like quality of the layouts, the seemingly endless corridors, and mysteriously locked doors. This complexity wasn't accidental. It was the physical manifestation of a society that believed proper relationships required constant management, careful boundaries, and elaborate protocols for human interaction. Chapter 4. The Dark Side of Wealth, Power, Misery, and the Price of Comfort. By the 1880s, the separate bedroom had evolved from medical necessity into social performance, but beneath the polished brass bedsteads and embroidered pillowcases lay a darker reality. The physical separation that was supposed to preserve health and demonstrate refinement often became a prison of loneliness, trapping couples in performances of respectability that slowly strangled genuine intimacy. The psychological architecture of Victorian marriage was as rigid as the physical architecture of their homes. Etiquette manuals, published by the dozens, provided detailed instructions for navigating the complex protocols of separated sleeping. A husband did not simply enter his wife's chamber. He knocked, requested permission, and waited for invitation. The spontaneous language of shared beds, a touch of the hand, a whispered conversation in darkness, was replaced by formal negotiations that turned intimacy into ceremony. For Victorian women, the separate bedroom offered a paradoxical form of power. In a world where they possessed few legal rights, where marriage transferred their property and identity to their husbands, the locked door of their chamber provided a rare space of autonomy. A wife could claim illness, fatigue, or indisposition, and the physical distance made these claims easier to maintain. The separate room became a fortress where Victorian women could exercise the limited control available to them over their own bodies. But this power came at an emotional cost. Imagine a woman lying in her elaborately decorated chamber, surrounded by floral wallpaper and delicate furniture, listening to the sounds of her husband moving about in his distant room. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing year, filled with unspoken desires, unvoiced complaints, and the gradual accumulation of small resentments that distance made easier to nurture than resolve. For men, the separate bedroom reinforced different, but equally constraining expectations. The Victorian gentleman was supposed to demonstrate self-control, to master his baser instincts through rational discipline. Sleeping alone became proof of moral character, evidence that he was not controlled by animal desires. But this performance of restraint often masked profound loneliness and confusion about how to express affection within the rigid boundaries of respectable marriage. The medical theories that justified separation carried their own psychological poison. Victorian doctors warned about the dangers of vital force depletion, suggesting that intimate contact could literally drain life energy from one partner to benefit the other. These theories introduced a vampiric element into marriage, transforming the beloved into a potential threat. Couples were taught to fear that their touch might be harmful, that their presence during sleep could weaken or corrupt their partner. The economic costs of maintaining separate bedrooms extended far beyond furniture purchases. The system required larger houses, additional heating, extra linens, and most significantly, more servants to maintain the elaborate infrastructure of separation. The performance of hygienic isolation was built on the labor of working-class women who lived in conditions that would have horrified their employers, crowded into attic rooms, sharing beds by necessity while their masters paid fortunes to sleep alone. The separate bedroom also facilitated the sexual double standards that characterized Victorian society. While wives were confined to their chambers and expected to maintain purity, husbands could slip away to pursue the other arrangements that respectable society pretended not to notice. The physical distance between spouses made infidelity easier to conceal and created emotional distance that made it easier to justify. Some couples found ways to subvert the system while maintaining its appearance. They might maintain elaborate separate chambers for social display, while actually sharing space when no servants or guests were present to observe. Others used the connecting doors between rooms to preserve intimacy, while satisfying social expectations. But these adaptations required constant vigilance and created additional stress in relationships already strained by social performance. The most tragic cases involved couples who genuinely embraced the separation, believing that distance demonstrated superior moral character. Letters and diaries from the period reveal marriages that slowly froze into polite formality, where husband and wife became strangers sharing a name and social obligations, but little else. The separate bedroom, intended to preserve health and demonstrate refinement, sometimes preserved nothing but loneliness. Children growing up in these households learned that marriage meant parallel lives rather than shared intimacy. They absorbed lessons about appropriate distance between spouses, about the dangers of too much closeness, about the superior virtue of self-control over emotional expression. These lessons shaped their own expectations about love and marriage, perpetuating patterns of separation across generations. The irony of Victorian wealth was that it allowed people to buy solutions to problems they had invented. The fear of contamination, the obsession with vital energy, the elaborate protocols of respectability, these were luxuries that only the wealthy could afford to indulge. Working-class families, crowded into single rooms and sharing beds by necessity, were spared the particular neuroses that afflicted their social superiors. As the 19th century drew to a close, some Victorian couples began to question the system they had inherited. Medical theories about miasma and vital force were giving way to more accurate understanding of disease transmission. The elaborate performances of respectability were beginning to seem hollow, even to those who participated in them. But habits established over decades proved difficult to break, and many couples remained trapped in separate chambers long after the justifications for separation had been discredited. The separate bedroom was never really about health or hygiene. It was about control, status, and the fundamental Victorian anxiety about human nature itself. In trying to rise above their animal instincts, in attempting to perfect marriage through separation and discipline, the Victorians created a system that often achieved the opposite of its stated goals. Instead of preserving love, it preserved loneliness. Instead of protecting health, it protected isolation. The empty space between those two iron bedsteads speaks volumes about the price of Victorian comfort. In that gap between mattresses lay all the unspoken words, untouched hands, and unlived intimacies of a generation that confused distance with dignity and mistake isolation for virtue. The separate bedroom was both symbol and instrument of a society that had forgotten that love, like health, sometimes requires a willingness to share the same air, to breathe the same dreams, and to risk contamination by another human heart. As we look back at those perfectly made Victorian bedrooms, with their matching furniture and careful spacing, we might ask ourselves, what fears drive our own domestic arrangements? What modern anxieties shape our most intimate spaces? And in our pursuit of perfect comfort, perfect health, and perfect relationships, what essential human connections might we be inadvertently sacrificing? The Victorians believed they were building a better world through separation and control. Instead, they built beautiful prisons where love could be displayed, but rarely lived. Their story serves as a reminder that the most dangerous contamination isn't physical, it's the emotional isolation that comes from fearing intimacy more than loneliness, from choosing safety over connection, from preferring the perfect distance of twin beds to the messy, complicated, essential closeness of shared dreams. What do you think? In our modern pursuit of optimized sleep, personal space, and individual wellness, are we repeating Victorian mistakes in new forms? Share your thoughts about the balance between intimacy and independence in relationships, and don't forget to explore more hidden stories from history that challenge everything you thought you knew about the past.